In missing persons investigations, geography and time are the two variables that kill a case. When a subject vanishes, the radius of probability expands by the hour. But what happens when the geography spans 3,000 miles and the timeline stretches across three distinct eras of forensic science? Spring, 1996. Deep in the coastal timberlands of Arcata, California, investigators establish a search grid around an unidentified set of skeletal remains. There is no wallet, no clothing tags, no dental records that trigger a match in any regional or state database. To local law enforcement, he is simply a John Doe, swallowed by the redwood damp. But the physical crime scene is a paradox. The forensic clock didn't start in the California fog. 13 years prior, and an entire continent away, the reality of this evidence box had already begun. The victim had a name: Gregory Hugh Oliver. Yet before modern genetic genealogy could bridge a 42-year gap and restore that identity, investigators first had to reconstruct the anonymous bones of the Arcata John Doe. Arcata, California. A coastal logging enclave defined by its isolation, its rugged coastline, and a sprawling, unforgiving forest that hides the sky. In the spring of 1996, a civilian hiker, walking miles off the designated trails, makes a grim discovery. Partially concealed beneath a thick bed of decaying fern fronds and redwood mulch is a human skull. Within 90 minutes, the Arcata Police Department arrives, establishing a half-mile containment perimeter. The transition from an undisturbed wilderness to an active homicide scene is methodical, silent, and clinical. Standard operating procedure dictates an immediate grid search. In an urban environment, this is a matter of mathematics, concrete, and geometry. In the old-growth redwoods, it is an anatomical scavenger hunt against nature itself. Investigators line up shoulder to shoulder, combing through acidic soil and dense underbrush. They are looking for context, a wallet, a scrap of clothing, anything that can tether this biological material to a legal identity. They find nothing. The Arcata canopy is incredibly dense. It creates its own microclimate down on the forest floor. You have high humidity, constant dampness, and soil that is highly acidic. When human remains are exposed to that specific environment, the decomposition timeline isn't just accelerated, the forensic narrative is effectively erased. When we arrived on scene, we realized very quickly we weren't looking at a victim who died months ago. We were looking at years. The elements had scrubbed the scene clean. The extraction process takes 3 grueling days. Sifting through the damp earth, technicians recover approximately 60% of the skeletal structure. Back at the county coroner's office, the clinical reality of the case sets in. There is no soft tissue remaining, no fingerprints to roll. The marrow is too degraded for the rudimentary DNA extraction techniques available in the mid-1990s. The medical examiner documents signs of perimortem trauma, indicators of a violent end. But the environment has washed away the immediate context of the murder. To give a John Doe his name, law enforcement must rely on the slow, unforgiving process of elimination. Based on the skeletal geometry, they construct a baseline biological profile. Male, Caucasian, likely between the ages of 25 and 40. Height estimated at 5 feet, 10 inches. It is a starting point, But in the United States, there are hundreds of thousands of men who fit that exact description. The 1996 investigative protocol is clear, but heavily analog. First, detectives query the local missing persons registry. They cross-reference the estimated physical parameters against men reported missing in Humboldt County over the previous decade. The result? 0 matches. The radius is systematically expanded to the county level. Investigators physically mail dental molds to regional precincts, hoping a dentist might recognize a filling or a specific root canal pattern from a missing patient in Northern California. Again, 0 matches. Finally, the profile is pushed up to the state database in Sacramento and entered into the FBI's National Crime Information Center, or NCIC. But in 1996, the NCIC missing persons file is only as effective as the data manually keyed into it by thousands of disparate, disconnected police departments across the country. There is no automated cross-referencing algorithm. If a desk sergeant in another state misspelled a name, miscategorized a date of birth, or simply failed to digitize a paper file from the 1980s, the system wouldn't flag a correlation. The California investigators were relying on a fragmented national network that was blind to its own data. Weeks pass. The teletypes return empty. It is as if the man found in the woods had never existed. The fatal flaw of the 1990s missing persons infrastructure was its absolute reliance on jurisdictional communication. If a person wasn't reported missing in the specific state where their body was found, the bureaucratic and technological walls were almost insurmountable. Investigators in California were exhaustively searching their registries for a ghost who didn't belong to them. As the months turned into years, the urgency evaporated. The physical evidence box was reclassified from an active investigation to cold storage. The composite sketch yellowed and faded on a precinct bulletin board. Arcata PD searched every local registry. Nothing matched. The trail went cold for 29 years. But 3,000 miles away, a family had already been waiting for 13. In victimology, the sudden deviation from a standardized routine is the first indicator of a critical event. Gregory Hugh Oliver was not a man who lived on the margins. In 1983, his footprint in Florida was firmly established. He maintained a consistent schedule, maintained familial ties, and possessed no known behavioral risk factors that would suggest a voluntary disappearance. He was an ordinary citizen, living a predictable life. Until, abruptly, he wasn't. The timeline of an involuntary disappearance rarely begins with a singular dramatic event. It begins with the mundane accumulation of absences, an unanswered phone call, a missed family engagement, mail piling up in a galvanized aluminum box at the end of a driveway. For Gregory's family, the realization did not arrive like a shockwave, but rather as a slow, creeping dread. Days bled into a week. The silence became absolute. When the family filed the official missing persons report with local Florida law enforcement, the investigative machinery of 1983 was set into motion. But it was a machinery crippled by its own error. Unlike a homicide, where a crime scene provides an anchor point, a missing persons case is an investigation into a void. Detectives are tasked with proving a negative, that the subject is not at home, not at work, not in the local hospital. The initial protocol was strictly localized. Florida investigators physically visited local hospitals, manually checking the admittance logs at the front desks. They drove to the county morgue to review toe tags. They monitored bank accounts for manual teller withdrawals. They dispatched patrol cars to scan the parking lots of local motels and transit stations for his vehicle. Every localized query returned the exact same result. Nothing. Gregory Hugh Oliver had simply ceased to generate a footprint within the state of Florida. You have to understand the operational reality of the early 80s. We didn't have cell phone tower pings. We didn't have license plate readers on the interstate. If a subject left our immediate jurisdiction without telling anyone, they effectively fell off the map. Our primary tool for cross-jurisdictional communication was a teletype machine. We would send out a physical bulletin, a description, maybe a photocopied picture, and hope that a desk sergeant 3 counties over happened to look at the bulletin board at the exact moment he had a John Doe matching that description. It was hunting in the dark. This localized tunnel vision was the fatal flaw of the 20th century missing persons infrastructure. The system operated on the logical assumption that people generally stay close to home, or at least within the borders of their home state. Once the immediate radius was exhausted, the investigation stalled. The file remained open, but the active search transitioned into a passive wait for a body to be found locally. For the Oliver family, the absence became a permanent fixture of their reality. They entered an agonizing purgatory known to thousands of families of the missing. The inability to grieve, paralyzed by the infinitesimal fraction of hope that he might walk back through the front door. They kept their phone numbers the same. They waited. But while Florida investigators were periodically checking local swamps and regional highways, Gregory was already in motion. The physical evidence would eventually prove that Gregory Hugh Oliver did not stay in the Sunshine State. For reasons that remain buried, he traversed the entire continental United States, crossing thousands of miles of interstate, passing through dozens of disconnected police jurisdictions, completely undetected. By the time his remains were resting on the forest floor in Arcata, his missing persons file was gathering dust in a filing cabinet on the opposite side of the country. The jurisdiction line had functioned perfectly as a wall. California had a body without a name. Florida had a name without a body. Neither state knew the other was holding the missing piece of the puzzle. How does a man vanish from a predictable life in the South and end up a forgotten anonymous skeleton in the Northern California Redwoods? To bridge that massive geographical and temporal gap, investigators needed a tool that wouldn't exist for another 3 decades. Cold cases are rarely solved by sudden dramatic epiphanies. They are resurrected by the methodical application of new technology to dormant evidence. By 2025, 29 years after the discovery in the Arcata timberlands, the physical biological material inside the evidence box had not changed. But the scientific framework used to analyze it had undergone a total revolution. The investigation was reopened, transitioning from the jurisdiction of local field detectives to the sterile domain of forensic geneticists. The first hurdle is physical extraction, the standard DNA profiling used by law enforcement in the late 1990s and 2000s. The CODIS system relied on short tandem repeats, or STRs. CODIS is highly effective, but it requires two things: relatively intact DNA and a direct match already sitting in the criminal database. The Arcata John Doe had neither. His remains were deeply compromised by the acidic California soil, and whoever he was, he had never been arrested. To identify him, scientists do not attempt to sequence the degraded surface bone. Instead, they extract the petrous portion of the temporal bone, the densest bone in the human skull, which acts as a biological vault, preserving viable DNA from environmental decay. Once the DNA is extracted and purified, the laboratory utilizes a process fundamentally different from traditional police forensics: single nucleotide polymorphism, or SNP profiling. Rather than looking at 20 specific markers to find a direct criminal match, SNP sequencing maps hundreds of thousands of genetic markers across the genome. The objective is not to find the victim in a database. The objective is to find anyone who shares his bloodline. The physical bone dust is translated into a complex digital data file, a string of code containing the ancestral blueprint of the John Doe. When we upload a forensic SNP profile to a genetic genealogy database, we are never expecting a direct hit. We aren't looking for a brother or a parent. We are looking for ghosts. We are looking for third, fourth, or fifth cousins, people who share a fraction of a percent of DNA with our victim. Once we find those distant relatives, the biology stops and the historical paperwork begins. We have to build their family trees backwards in time until we find the common ancestor they share with our John Doe. And then we build forward. The digital file is uploaded to law enforcement-approved genealogical databases. The algorithm returns a list of distant matches. The closest match shares roughly 75 centimorgans of DNA, indicating a likely third cousin. For the investigative team, this is the anchor point. The process of triangulation begins. It is an exercise in painstaking digital excavation. Investigators pull census records from the 1920s, draft registration cards from World War II, obscure obituaries from microfiche archives, and localized marriage certificates. They build the third cousin's family tree backward, generation by generation, until they locate a set of great-great-grandparents living in the American South in the late 19th century. This ancestral couple is the genetic origin point. The John Doe descends directly from them. The investigative pivot is now mathematical. The genealogist must trace every single descendant of that 19th century couple forward through time, creating a massive, sprawling network of hundreds of individuals leading up to the 1980s. To find the victim, they use the process of elimination. Based on the 1996 anthropological profile, they eliminate all female descendants. They eliminate all males who were documented as alive after 1996. They eliminate males whose height or age categorically exclude them. Branch by branch, the massive family tree is pruned. The geographical data presents a massive anomaly. The targeted branches of the family tree are almost entirely rooted in the southeastern United States, specifically Florida. There is no logical documented connection to the Pacific Northwest. But in forensic genealogy, geography is secondary to biology. The DNA does not lie. The genealogists follow the genetic thread until they narrow the massive web down to a single nuclear family residing in Florida. in the early 1980s. The family has 3 sons. Investigators pull modern public records. 2 of the brothers are currently alive, leaving a traceable digital footprint of property taxes, vehicle registrations, and voter rolls. But the third brother's timeline abruptly stops. There are no tax filings after 1983. There is no death certificate on file. There is no record of his existence for over 40 years. When the forensic team requests the original 1983 missing persons report from Florida, the parameters are a flawless, absolute match to the Arcata anthropological profile. For the first time in 29 years, the John Doe file was closed. The evidence box finally had a name. In the end, forensic science cannot reverse a tragedy. It cannot explain the missing miles between Florida and California, nor can it return the 42 years of silence endured by a family. But it can restore the fundamental truth that time and elements attempt to erase: an identity. A cold case is never a forgotten case. It is simply an investigation waiting for the technology to catch up to the evidence. We never forget the individuals in those boxes. When we finally get to make that phone call to a family, when we can tell them we found their brother, their son, that is the moment the system fulfills its purpose. Gregory Hugh Oliver is no longer a John Doe in the California damp. He has gone home.